Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. We're continuing our Let's Bake Quilt Sew Along. The design is by Lori Holt. The fabrics I'm using are scraps from several previous projects, but they're all manufactured by Riley Blake and they are Lori Holt collections. So this is week 3 and we're going to be focusing on that large apron block, the egg beater block, and the rolling pin block. Now I definitely have some modifications for these, and I will share those as we move along. This week, when we get to that egg beater, you're going to find out pretty quickly that I am not doing that hand stitching, that we're going to do all of that with the machine, and it's going to look just as good, and we're going to be just as happy with the results. The other thing this week that's a little different is that our rolling pin, we don't have a Sew Simple shape for that. We have the measurements, and we have to create our own shape. So the first thing we're going to do is get out the interfacing, get that rolling pin created, and then we're going to start pulling our fabrics, sewing them all together, flipping them, pressing them, laying out the blocks, appliquing it down, and having our reveal. All right, so for our rolling pin block, we needed a 1.5 by 8 inch rectangle. So when you look at your interfacing, you don't want to draw that right on the edge because that's where you're going to be stitching, right? So we want 1.5 by 8 a little bit in. So I'm going to put the edge of my ruler right at the 2, and that's going to give me 1/2 inch in from this side. And I'm going to put the 8 right about 1/2 inch in from the end. So then I'm just going to draw 2 lines, the 2 sides. Now I'm going to move my ruler up, and I'm going to line that line that I drew right up at the 1.5 inch mark. And then I can draw those other 2 sides. All right, so this is what I need for the rolling pin. I'm just going to do a little cheat here and use my rotary cutter. Cut that out. Then this can go back in the box with the other Sew Simple shape traces that I've done. And we need to pull our background fabrics out. So let's go ahead and do that. Here is the one for the large apron, the egg beater, and the rolling pin. And all of those are week 3. They're clearly labeled. If you've used my organization cheat sheet, then you will have clear labels to grab those out with. Okay, so for the apron, we need Sew Simple shapes 1, 2, and 3. So we'll just go back here and see if we can find those pieces, and we're going to cut them out. Now the egg beater actually doesn't have any Sew Simple shapes. It's just bias tape and stitching. And if you're following the original design, you have some hand stitching to do. And so that will be really cool. And you can do that. I'm going to be doing a machine stitch method. So I do not have any of that hand stitching to do this week. All right, so for the rolling pin, there are a few different things we need. We definitely need the main color for our rolling pin, and then we also need the handles, which is bias tape. There's also a couple pieces on the end that are made from bias tape as well. Okay, so let's get our fabrics for the rolling pin together first. All right, now that we have all of our Sew Simple shapes laying here on the design board with our background fabrics, we're going to first cut our bias tape strips for our egg beater. And there are 3 different sizes that we need for the egg beater. So we're going to cut all of those sizes together out of the same cloth. So the egg beater has one consistent look and feel throughout. The first one, and I'm just going to flip this over just because I can. Doesn't matter which side of the cloth that you cut from. Now this is straight grain bias tape, so you don't have to worry about having it cut on a diagonal. The only other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off these ends to a point just so they're easier to thread through my bias tape makers. And that's really all we had to cut for the egg beater. Now moving on to the rolling pin. This main color is the main body of your rolling pin, and that is going to be a brown. All right, so we're going to cut our rolling pin out of this little scrap here. And this is basically what I do. I just find my scrap that I want to use, and I lay my Sew Simple shape on there. You obviously can use the guide that I've put together for you. And that way you can pre-cut all your fabrics without having to match them up if you don't want to. But I'm using a bunch of scraps, right? So I'm just going to match them up as I go along. And that's how I plan on tackling this. All right, so we have 2 pieces of bias tape to make for the rolling pin. We don't need that much bias tape, but just enough that you want to make sure that you do have enough of the length. The green is for the handles, and like I said, that nutmeg color is for on the ends. It's like the little rollers there. If you have an old school rolling pin, then you know that on the ends there's like this little circle that goes around there, around the handles to hold them in place. And again, I'm just going to cut those to a point. And then this is all I need for the rolling pin. Now the last block that I have to pull fabrics for is the apron. The apron has some apron ties, and the apron itself is yellow. The main body is a really pretty teal color. And then, I don't know, the pocket is red. As I mentioned last week, I am using a bunch of scraps. So I'm not able to stay true to the original design per se, to use the same exact fabrics, but I am trying to stay within the same color family. And the reason I'm doing that is because the color distribution in the quilt is really good. And I want to kind of stay true to that a little bit, but I'm not able to use the exact same fabrics because I don't have those fabrics. Okay, so we have a couple different things for bias tape to cut. And actually one of them needs to be true bias tape and the other one is just straight. So we're going to go ahead and cut the straight off first. And then we also have this little piece here that is going to be out of the yellow. Just if you're using scrap fabrics like I am, just pay attention and make sure that you don't accidentally cut your piece from an area that has a little overlap of the cut, and that it's, going to mess up your shape. Because I have a little cut right here that if I wasn't careful, I could have cut too short and then my shape wouldn't have turned out correctly. All right, so the rest of this needs to be cut on the bias, and it needs to be 15 inches. I need 3 of them. And the way we're going to do that is just take our great big ruler, find our 45-degree angle, lay that on the side. And we need 3 of these. Next thing we're going to do is head to the ironing board so we can make our bias tape, and we're going to go ahead and draw out our egg beater. We'll be using the light box and the tracing guide that's in the sew-along guide. To make it easier for myself, I have my various size of bias tape makers laid out with the strips from the various blocks that we're making today. So all I need to do is just take my first strip, spray it with a little bit of best press, and start feeding it through. Now you might notice when I'm spraying these, I do not spray all the way to the end that I'm going to be putting through my bias tape maker, and that is definitely by design. I don't want to get that end wet, because if you get it wet, it's a lot more difficult to get it started in the bias tape maker. So just keep that in mind. And if it does happen, don't stress out over it. You'll just take your iron and press it and get it all dry before you start feeding it through your bias tape maker. Now we are going to go ahead and draw our egg beater block, and then we'll start sewing our shapes. So I want to make sure that egg beater block is really nice and flat before I start drawing on it. All right, just like we used in the last video, this is a Cricut light pad. And I am just going to use it to kind of center my egg beater on there. I'm going to use one of these lines here that I can see that's bias tape to kind of make sure it's even across my fabric as well. The only thing I need to make sure is it's 4.5 by 8.5. And I know that I have way more than that. So I am good to go with that. Now I'm going to get my pencil, and this is the Sew Line 3-in-1 chalk pencil. And I'm just going to basically trace all of these lines onto my fabric. Now, since I am machine stitching and not hand stitching, most of these lines are like a satin stitch when you hand stitch. So I'm just going to make one single line down in the middle of them. And then when I go to machine stitch this, I will know where to be. And we'll use this again after we get the machine stitching done. We'll use it again to lay out our bias tape. Okay, so let's go sew our shapes. We honestly don't have that many shapes this week to trim out. So, because that egg beater block is all bias tape, definitely have some applique to do, and some machine stitching to do, but we don't really have that many shapes to trim out, which is kind of nice for a change, because the rest of these are all apron. And again, if you are trimming shapes for the very first time, remember that you want to trim somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch away from your stitch line. Do not cut through your stitch line, because that's what keeps your nice finished edge for your applique shapes once we turn them out. This quilt is coming together quite nicely. We don't have that many blocks finished, but it's already coming together nicely, and I can already kind of see how it's going to look, and the design wall is getting very cute with all these little blocks. We'll have 3 more to add today. Remember, you cut through your interfacing, but not through your fabric. All right, so here we go with the rolling pin. Just turning it out, and then we're going to grab our 2-point turner. Just so you know, the scissors I was using is a Fiskars Sharp. It's a Microtech point, so it's really sharp on the point of those scissors, and you can slice right through your interfacing without needing to use a seam ripper. And if you don't have scissors like that, that is your other option. You just use your seam ripper to rip through the interfacing, but not the fabric. Here's our cute little apron. Do you guys use aprons when you're cooking? I have cute aprons. I don't use them. I keep thinking one day maybe I'll do some kind of like little display or something cute with them. Maybe sometime. I think they'd be cute, like hanging on a wall. If you had all different colors of aprons, you could hang them on a white wall. Be cute instead of art, or sort of instead of a quilt. That's what I have in my living room. I used my living room wall as a space to hang my applique quilts. Before we start laying out our blocks, we need to stitch all of the lines on the beater block. And in order to make sure that I have a good result, I'm going to put a piece of stabilizer underneath this. And this is just some tearaway stabilizer. You use it a lot for embroidery. And basically, it's just going to help me make sure that this fabric doesn't pull and distort as I'm stitching. If you're interested, I am using a Juki DX7. I do have it kind of like on a buttonhole stitch right now. It's just like a satin stitch, basically. Now, when I get down here to these beaters, I'm going to decrease the width of the stitch and also the length. So it's going to be a little closer together and definitely a lot smaller than what you saw up above. And I'm just following the lines. That stabilizer is keeping my fabric nice and smooth for me. Now when I'm curving up like this, I'm stopping my needle on the right hand. That way when you make that turn, it's just really nice and smooth. If it does look like it's getting a little puckery or wrinkly, don't worry about it too much yet. We will press this really good. So most likely, most of those little puckers, little bitty puckers, they will press out and you'll be fine. The presser foot that I'm using is clear and it has a little triangle in the middle. And it does help me kind of line it up with the line that I am trying to follow. So that is nice. All right, so after you have all of that machine stitched on, you can just go and rip off all of the extra stabilizer on the back because this is a tearaway. So that's exactly what it's designed to do. And I could rip this out in the middle too if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it. It's fine. It's fine either way, to leave it or to rip it. But this is my little beaters. Let's go back to the ironing board. Before we put our bias tape on, we're just going to give it a really good press to get it nice and flat. And you'll be surprised, it really does flatten out. Since this fabric is so light, I did go ahead and rip more of that tearaway off of there just because I don't want it to show through the front of my fabric everywhere like it was. All right, now we will put it back on the light pad and line it up. And we will get our various pieces of bias tape and start putting those pieces onto our beater. And it looks like here's the handle and then this little piece in here. There's not that much bias tape, but it's enough that, you know, you want to put it on there. All right, so now our egg beater block is ready for applique. Now the little handle over here is a button, so we won't put that on until after the quilt is finished. I think next we'll do the rolling pin. And this block, the rolling pin is 2.5 by 12.5, unfinished. And so for the rolling pin, what I'm going to do is just place it on the fabric. And I'm going to just glue, but not to the ends, because I want to be able to push my little handles underneath there. And now for the handles, what I'm going to do, a little trick for you. I'm going to cut the bias tape in half that I have. And I'm going to glue it in half. Now these pieces are probably about 5 inches long. But it doesn't really matter because we are going to slip them under the ends and then line it up with our ruler to make sure that our block is going to be the right size. The last block we have to lay out this week is the apron block. And this block is 8.5 by 12.5 when it is all said and done. And let's press our shapes first. I did go ahead and press the background fabric in half, the lengthways. That way we can just kind of use that to line up our various pieces on this apron. And this is super cute, you guys. It's just pretty easy to lay out. And I'm not going to do the rickrack, just so everyone knows. That goes like that. That goes like this. And this goes like this. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So we see where the center is. That is not on center. There we go. And then that goes like this. This goes here. So I'm going to do a little gluing to begin with. All right, so we need to do some curved bias because we want to basically curve this around for the apron strings that go around your neck. And then we also have two pieces that will be coming out here and curving down and around. And so we're going to move this off to the side just for a minute. And this is why real bias tape is cool. Okay, so for the apron strings, I'm going to stretch and pull this around. And I'm going to hold it there for a minute just to give it a little time to set. And I'm going to do the same thing for this one because this is going to be the neckband. And this one is going to be basically a U when I get done with it. And now this one needs to curve the other way. Okay, so that is the three pieces of bias tape that I need. And we're going to use our ruler to make sure we don't get too tall. And then the other thing I want to make sure is that I don't get too wide. So I'm going to move this down a little bit because I'm up against the wall. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of guide this up. Put that right in the middle, which is, it's 8.5 wide. So 4.25 will be in the middle. Move that down just a little bit more. And remember when I pressed my fabric in half, so I have a middle point. So now I can take this, and you can really make your apron strings do whatever you want here. And they don't need to be symmetrical. I mean, they can be if you want, but they don't have to be. You do need to turn under the end. And the last thing we're going to do is put that waistband on. And that's the thicker piece of the bias tape that you made for this block. And it's just going to go right along there. Let's go back to the sewing machine and do some applique. For anyone who hasn't watched my videos before, I am using a Juki DX7. I have it set on a zigzag stitch. The zigzag width and length that I have is 1.8 and 0.9. So it is a pretty small little zigzag. I can do zigzag, and you can too, because with this applique method, everything that you do has a finished edge. So you don't have to worry about raw edges. You don't have to worry about the fraying like you would with like the raw edge applique. So you can get away with a zigzag, or you can do a little straight stitch for that matter. You don't have to do a really heavy satin stitch on the edges of these. You can get away with something much looser, and that will allow your quilt to just kind of flow a little better. So obviously we're starting with the beater block here, and I'm just going around the different pieces of bias tape. When I'm doing machine applique, if I come to a corner, I like stopping with my needle in the outer position. That way when you turn that corner, it gives it a nice little finished look. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next block, even though I need to trim up those strings. For our rolling pin block, we have 3 layers. And when I look at applique, I like to go from bottom to top. On this one, I really glued this down really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right in that little segment right there with a stay stitch. Now I'm going to lift my rolling pin back, and I'm going to go around the brown, or the nutmeg color, as they call it. And we'll stop where we started with that stay stitch again. And then we'll go and do the other end. Okay, the only block we have left to do is that great big apron block. Let me grab that. Alrighty, so now we have our little apron block, and that's the last one we have to do this week. After we get this done, then we will be able to trim all the blocks up and have our reveal. Super excited about this little apron block. It is so cute. It is so cute. Now I did start with the ties for the apron just because they're on the bottom, right? And we work from bottom up so we can hide some of those starts and stops underneath things. That's really what I like to do. I did not have to stay stitch because this blue layer will be going over top of it. So I don't have to worry about doing a locking stitch or a stay stitch or a back stitch or anything like that. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. And then we'll go ahead and do the necktie as well. Now, if you noticed, what I did there was I just kind of pulled this back and away from the edge so I can go ahead and applique that little part down underneath where that waistband is for the apron. I'm not going to worry about appliquing across there between the blues because there's no reason. We'll applique and hold all that stuff down when we do the little yellow apron and the waistband. So there's no reason to spend time on that. And I started underneath the waistband on the left-hand side because that way I can also stop there and you don't have to do a stay stitch or anything because it's all hidden, and the upper layers will hold it all in place. Now I did not add a rickrack to this. The original design had a rickrack kind of tucked in underneath. I just didn't want that. So you will notice that difference in my quilt than the original design. Obviously, if you're making this quilt and you want rickrack, then you should add it. And again, since that waistband is going to be going over that piece of yellow that I'm stitching on right now, I'm not going to worry about stitching it down across the top. Now this one does get a stay stitch because it's on the top. It's the top layer. So it has to have that little locking stitch to make sure it doesn't come undone. Oh, let me. I decided I would show you the pressing process this week just because I thought, they might be interested. I like to press my applique blocks face down, and I like to press them on a wool pressing mat or some sort of a really thick pressing pad. And the reason I like to do that is because that way the applique shapes are more likely to be able to kind of press into the wool mat or the pressing pad, and you don't flatten them as much. And I like to do it face down just because that way I don't necessarily have to worry about going over any of the stitching that might, crumple a shape or something. So I just spray them with a little bit of best press out of my little sprayer and then press them really good with a very hot iron onto a wool pressing mat. So we have 3 more blocks to add to our collection this week. The first one we're going to trim up is the rolling pin. It is a 2.5 by 12.5 inch block. So I'm basically just going to put that on my cutting mat. I'm going to use my 12.5 inch ruler. I'm going to find the center of my handles. I'm also going to trim a little string. Find the center of my handles. They should be at the 1/2 inch mark, pretty close on either end. And count 1, 2, and 1/2. So we want to go down here. Yep, that is looking good. 1/2 inch on both ends, 1/2 inch on the top and bottom. And then we'll just move this up to the 2.5 inch mark and cut our 4th side. All right, our egg beater is a 4.5 by 8.5. So I'm going to grab an 8.5 inch ruler just because I can line it up pretty quickly that way. So at 8.5, the middle would be, let's turn this around. At 8.5, 4.5, the middle would be 2.25. But now we do want to go a little bit over because we do have that button to add over here. And then let's center this. All right. There's our 8.5. Turn this around. And there is our 4.5. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1/2. Yep. All right. Always good to count. Always, always, always. Put that ruler back. And now let's grab our gorgeous apron. Now this apron is 10.5 by 12.5. No. The apron is 8.5 by 12.5. And if we did this correctly, we left 1/2 inch at the top and bottom. And we did. So, and we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5. We have about 3/8 of an inch on both sides. And let's get this. I want the bottom of my apron to be level in the block. So that's why I adjusted it just a smidgen. Even though I'm not cutting my background straight with the way I cut it to begin with, my block will be straight, and that's what I care about. Now we're going to move this to the 8.5 inch line, line it up again, and cut our 4th side. Our week 3 blocks have joined weeks 1 and 2 up on the design wall. I am so excited about this. So we're right here. We have our cute little egg beaters, then we have our rolling pin, and we have our large apron. So happy about how those turned out. They're so cute, and I love the way this quilt is coming together. Hey, I hope you picked up some tips and tricks today on these blocks. There wasn't anything too crazy to handle today. Just some curved bias tape. If you're newer to quilting and applique, that may be a new little technique for you. The egg beater is definitely something that I had not shared on my channel before, just using some stabilizer behind that. It just helps stabilize the fabric, as the name of the product says, and make sure that you don't get your ripples and puckers in that fabric when you're stitching onto just a single layer of fabric. You put that extra layer of stabilizer behind it just gives you some stabilization for your fabric. So hopefully, if you had not tried that before, check it out. I'll put a link in the description box below on the product that I use. It's just a Pellon tearaway fabric stabilizer. I hope you enjoyed those tips and tricks today. I hope your progress on the Let's Bake quilt is coming along nicely. If you're just watching the videos, that's amazing too. Thank you so much for joining me. The best way you can help me out is just like the video, share it out to your friends, and subscribe to the channel. So until next time, find joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating. And remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.